Hello, and welcome to the last webinar of our 2022 Lincoln Learn series. It's great that we have so many people here today. Our topic of diversity and inclusion is obviously very important, and we are delighted to have a range of voices today to get as many perspectives on the topic as possible. Related to this, our platform has a closed caption function, which you can turn on or off at the bottom of the screen. And please do use the right-hand side chat of your screen to engage with other members of the audience and, of course, pose questions to our speakers. For this Lincoln Learn, we have tried to look at diversity and inclusion in education at all levels, right through to the corporate world, where L&D is a major function of most organizations. We are delighted to welcome back one of the most popular speakers at our recent Global Learning Summit Learnovation, Dr. Joanne Banks. Joanne is a lecturer and researcher in inclusive education in the School of Education at Trinity College, Dublin. She will help us understand the benefits of creating more inclusive learning environments and some tools that are available. Sheila Curtin, then from PwC, will take us through some of the initiatives introduced in her own organization to create a more inclusive environment and cater to the range of learners they employ. We will finish up today's event with a panel discussion where we will take a look at the topic from the research, formal learning, and corporate perspectives. Our panel discussion will be facilitated by Jackie Brown of ETU, who has a strong background in adult education and learning with an approach that is rooted in dialogic and inclusive practices. Jackie will welcome Joanne and Sheila back to the stage, where they will then be joined by Joe Rafus, Assistant Vice Principal and Art Teacher from Mullingar Community College. Joe has 16 years experience working in DESH schools and is currently leading a new program aimed at remodeling school planning across DESH schools and improving professional collaboration in schools. So as with all of our Lincoln Learn webinars, we allow some time to engage with each other in our networking space at 1:30 for 5 minutes. You will see a networking button on the left side of your screen. It'll go live at this time, so simply enter that area and click the Join Now button, and you will be paired with another attendee for a chat. We invite you to discuss the following question. What does diversity and inclusion mean for your organization? If you like, you can share your observations in the chat, and once this segment is over, simply hit the stage button in the left-hand menu and meet us back here for the panel discussion. So just before we kick off today's webinar, I want to give a very brief overview of Learnovate and what we do for those of you in attendance today who may not be familiar with our organization. We're based in Trinity College, Dublin, and we are a research organization with a focus on the future of work and learning. Our role is to help organizations transform their learning experiences from students to employees, and our membership model is open to all organizations. The benefits of joining Learnovate community include access to our research outputs, and we currently have 65 global members from a wide range of sectors. Check out our website for more information on how you can become a member of Learnovate. And now back to the business at hand. We'll welcome to Lake and Learn, Joanne. We are delighted to have you here today.
So good afternoon, everybody. As Thomas said, I'm Sheila Curtin. I lead the Centre for Learning and Development at PwC, where my focus is on developing the human and leadership skills of our people. And I suppose that's the perspective I'm coming from today when I share some thoughts on inclusivity in L&D at PwC. But I thought, first of all, it would be useful for context to start by giving you, I suppose, a high-level overview of inclusion and diversity at PwC, because I think that will give you a sense of the broader environment in which we operate in. So I have a few slides that I'm just going to talk through. I think Louise is good. So if I could just, forgive me a sec, let's just go back to my first slide. So many of you may know that PwC is a global professional services firm, and we operate in over 150 countries with over 328,000 people globally. And every territory has an inclusion and diversity leader. And there is a global leader for inclusion and diversity who sits on the firm's global leadership team. And here in Ireland, we have around 3,200 people with about 60 nationalities represented. So we really see inclusion and diversity as fundamental to how we operate, because we really believe that when people from different backgrounds with different points of views and skills come together to work together and to value each other in an environment that enables them to thrive, we really do create the most value for our people as well as for our clients and society. And we really want our people to feel comfortable to be themselves and to be different. We even say on our sites, be you, be different. And I think a clear message from the top, our managing partner is often heard saying, it doesn't matter to him what gender, age, race, sexual orientation, and he'd say, or even football club you support. He says everyone is welcome, and he wants everyone to feel included and to feel that they belong. And I think that's a really important message from the top. And I experience a consistently very strong supportive message from our leadership team. And I think that's important in creating an inclusive environment in any organization. And I think here at PwC, we do embrace and embed the inclusion, diversity, and well-being of our people into everything that we do. We now have a dedicated inclusion and diversity person who works in our people experience team. And I thought I would just share a few examples of some of the inclusive and diverse firm initiatives that we have. I suppose one of the first ones, which I think is great, is we have 4 different diversity and inclusion pillars, and they represent generational, culture, gender, and LGBTQ+. And those groups really champion the employee voice. They celebrate the diversity of our people. I suppose they drive that culture of allyship and belonging through actions and behaviours. And they provide a community of support for all our employees, no matter how they identify. Throughout the year, there's lots of education and awareness that we tie in to mark some key inclusion dates. So, for example, like International Women's or Men's Day, transgender awareness, mental health awareness. And we do have a focus on health and well-being. And we say that we provide to our people a green light to talk whenever they need help. And that's a campaign that we have. We embrace flexible working and part-time work so that our people can work in a way that best enables them to be innovative, productive, and to thrive. And we have a range of what we call inclusion first policies and benefits to support our people and their work-life balance. And they include things like you might be familiar with everyday flexibility, parental leave, maternity leave, but more recently, pregnancy loss, fertility, and domestic abuse leave. And as part of our firm strategy, the people strategy is really important. And the firm strategy will say to our people, look, wherever you are in your life or your career, we want you to feel like you can flex your work, you can be appreciated for being you, you can make an impact, and you can unlock your potential. And when we think of unlock your potential, that really is the essence of the work we do in L&D in supporting the development of our people. So we're working in an environment that is culturally inclusive and diverse. So as I look at inclusivity in L&D, I think me and my team, we think about, well, what's the learning environment we contribute to creating that will enable our people to thrive and develop as inclusive leaders? I suppose the first thing I would say is that nobody is excluded from availing of learning and development opportunities in PwC. And traditionally in professional services firm and back a number of years ago, people primarily joined our firm through the graduate program, and they would have progressed up through the firm. And I suppose our approach to learning was a very linear development path for them. But in recent years, we've seen the firm has significantly grown. We've changed, there's been a real shift in our resource model in that we've a lot more experienced hires now who are coming with a vast range of experience levels. We offer a much broader range of services from what it might have been the traditional accounting and financial and tax advice to things like cyber, health, technology, government and health. So a lot more diverse skills. And of course, as I mentioned, we've nearly over 60 nationalities represented now. So clearly in developing our people, one size does not fit all. And I'm sure any of you on the call today with an L&D background can attest to that. So a much more personalized learning approach is needed if we're going to be inclusive and address all the needs of our people. So to ensure we meet those diverse needs and we are inclusive in our approach, we had to change. And some examples of what we did was to move from that linear model to what I would call a much more development space. And what I mean by that is we've moved, so we had this, everybody came in at graduate level, moved up, followed a very defined development path, whereas there's a lot of mandatory programs and steps along the way, to now only having a few mandatory programs, and they're probably at key milestone moments around being a manager, to significantly increasing the range and variety of other learning options for our people so that they can choose from to best meet their development need and to learn at a time that suits them. We now offer a range of human skills, both face-to-face and virtual programs. We've digital curriculums, e-learns, compositions, and many other learning assets that people can avail of, articles, videos, podcasts, TED Talks, etc. So they get to choose the mode that suits them best. And I think in the environment, if we're encouraging people to own and drive their development, we need to ensure that learning is accessible to them and that we've provided this development space to them. The other big change, I suppose, that we did was in designing programs that we are running. We know our programs are much more experiential now. And in the past, we used to have pre-prepare in advance a set of case studies or scenarios that people would work through. So recognizing just the diversity now and that not one size fits all, we changed our program design so that our people bring their own example to work on. So while they're collectively together on a program and learning and sharing from each other, the program or the development for them can feel quite personal because they're working through their real life scenario, but they're still getting the benefits of other people's perspective. And given the diversity of our people, and to ensure that they feel like they belong, I think it's really important that our managers and our leaders recognize and respect different styles. So all our leadership and management programs include a lot of self-awareness on different styles and impact so that our managers understand and respect differences as they lead themselves and others. And given the very diverse and broad range of services PwC now offers, from an L&D perspective, one of the things we focused ourselves on was the importance of being strategically aligned to the business, and to ensure that we are actually now meeting the needs of the business. Nobody's excluded, that what we're doing is relevant for them and learner-centric and adds value. So in recent years, we've really enhanced that, what I call the L&D business partnering, and I have a dedicated BP for different areas of the business. And just to share a small, very small and easy change that we made recently to support inclusivity, I attended a conference where there was a speaker talking about disability, and just could have posed the question generally, how in your role are you making it easy and comfortable for people with a special need to ask for help? And that really resonated with me, because I thought, in our joining instructions, it's probably standard for everybody's joining instructions now to say if you have any particular dietary requirements. But while we'd be very supportive of dealing with any special need, we don't actually say it, or we don't actually ask people if they have any special assistance needs. So, and I think by including something like that in a joining instruction, it kind of helps maybe normalize the request for the people, so that they can make it easy for them to ask for it. So that was an instant change that we made to all our joining instructions when we came back from the conference. And even just today, as we're talking, and Tom at the start talked about enabling the captions as being a feature that we can do. I know that some of our PowerPoint slides and different slides has that feature now, and I think that's something we need to be more consistently thinking about, whether we need to do simple things like that that increases accessibility and inclusivity with our participant groups. So I suppose what hopefully I did today was just to give you a flavour that, PwC is a very diverse workforce with a very diverse service offering, and that we do have a strong inclusion and diversity culture that has full leadership support. And giving you a flavour of some of the initiatives that we do have. And I suppose that is the environment that we're working in, in providing inclusivity within our L&D. And in L&D, the key change we had, I suppose, is really now personalising our learning and providing the range of learning modalities to help create the authentic and inclusive leaders that we need. So I feel we've made good progress, both in L&D and as a firm, on the inclusivity and diversity, but it's a really important agenda. And I think the journey continues for us at PwC. And my aim is to keep an open mind and curiosity to learn and see how we continue to support inclusivity and diversity in our L&D work. And to quote one of my colleagues who always says, every day is a school day. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Sheila. And again, apologies for having introduced you as Joanne. But I really enjoyed that presentation, and I will hand over the floor to you, Joanne.
Thanks so much, Tom, and thanks to Learnovate for putting on this event. I'm delighted to be speaking at it, and I understand the audience today is quite diverse. So we might just start my presentation, and I'll go through what I'm going to talk about today. I think the engagement and interest in this topic is growing, and for me as an educator, I work at the School of Education in Trinity College. It's something that for me has traditionally been focused on the teaching and learning environment. But I think events like today really show that it's not just within the teaching and learning context, but it's also around the culture and attitudes around what we have, around EDI, diversity, inclusion. And a lot of these words are used quite a lot. And hopefully my presentation today will try to get behind that language and just like what Sheila was saying, to have a meaningful sense of what it means and how it can be implemented, whether it be in learning and development in the workplace or in a classroom setting or at higher education. It's also important to remember that diversity isn't just about the learners. And for me, this is something that I've really learned over the past few years, but also around the staff, and it's around looking around at the diversity that exists amongst your colleagues and your peers, and to kind of situate it within that. So I specialise in diversity and inclusion, and I run a number of master's programs there, and I'm also interested in educational disadvantage. So that's my role within the School of Education. So today what I'd like to talk about is, I'm going to take you on a little bit of a history lesson. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the legacy on our education system. And the reason I do that is because a lot of these conversations don't operate independent of the historical context as to how we are where we are in relation to issues around people who are considered different or other in our society. I'm also going to just touch on the changing attitudes and the shifts, both in culture and attitudes, but also possibly in parallel then the policy shifts that have taken place over the past number of years that are, I believe, driving a lot of the change, the trickle-down change that we're experiencing now. And I'm going to finish talking about inclusive pedagogy and an inclusive ethos, and really questioning, can our education and how we learn ever be inclusive regardless of the setting that we're in? So just to give you a sense of what the Irish education system has gone through, but also for people from other national contexts here today, most national systems have gone through these periods, or what in academic literature have been described as the era of neglect and denial. And that really stems, that's that first set of inclusion dots in the top left-hand corner. That really centers from the kind of deficit, or what's called the medical model of disability, where people with disabilities were traditionally not educated, they were simply at home. And that's described as I said, that's the medical model of disability. And then within Ireland, within the mid-20th century, moved into what is described as the era of the special school. And it's easy to be critical of perhaps these developments at the time, but in actual fact, they were quite innovative in that they were, for the first time, including people with disabilities in an educational setting, albeit often residential and full-time for young children. And that still is identifying with the medical model of disability, where the deficit is considered to lie within the individual themselves. And as I said, it's that kind of medical understanding of disability. And then I'm going to move you into the era of integration and inclusion. And that's these two right-hand inclusion dots. Where Ireland is at the moment in relation to inclusion is we're somewhere between integration and inclusion. I listened to Morning Ireland yesterday and listened to the minister. You would think we're firmly in the integration set of inclusion dots, but I'll leave my views aside on that. But it's basically moving into what's called the social model of disability, whereas instead of the deficit lying within the individual themselves, that we consider the deficit to be within the environment in which the individual is, or the teaching approaches in which the individual is experiencing. And that's where we need to reflect on ourselves as to just how inclusive is this learning environment that I'm providing. I just thought as well, for people from Ireland, but also people from outside Ireland, that it's really important to understand how our education system is structured, and it's very much structured based on this legacy. So we basically run a parallel track of what's called special education and mainstream education. And you can see here within mainstream, we've got primary, lower secondary, upper secondary. If students wish to continue on, they enter into further education, higher education, and the workplace, okay? Running alongside that, we then had the development of special schools, as I said, which runs parallel to the mainstream system. More recently, we've embedded special classes within mainstream context. So students are separated for their learning based on a identified characteristic, if you like, in order to receive education. And this is really prevalent for those of you that are aware in the media at the moment, as this appropriate school place for young people with disabilities. So this really draws attention. I think it's the crux of the inclusion debate, is just why some students are educated separately to others, and whether that's the way we want to go, and also whether we are being compliant with national and international policy in doing that. At higher and further education, we have what's called, instead of the supports being embedded within the school environment, like is in our primary and secondary systems, we have disability services and kind of add-on services where students need to identify themselves and seek out supports in order to receive what are called, unfortunately the language here is quite complex, called accommodations in order to perhaps sit exams, etc. In the workplace, we don't really know how this is playing out, and perhaps you guys here today might be able to shed some light on that. But we do know that a lot of decisions are made for people with disabilities or people who experience barriers to learning for whatever reason very early in their school careers, and they simply don't have the opportunity to attend further or higher education or the workplace. So what is this? Why do we still play this out? If we were to create our education system in the morning, we simply probably, like, I really don't think we'd develop it like it is now. The research suggests that there is an administrative convenience to the separate special education sector or disability services, and that it's easier. It's what we know. The systems are already in place. It's kind of working fine, and like there is that kind of attitude or thinking. There's also been a massive in primary and post-primary expansion of these add-on supports in an effort to kind of differentiate often instruction, but also supports for students based on their characteristics, whether it be a disability or otherwise. And that has developed, in my view, into a sector. And once you have a sector developed, an industry kind of is created around that. Importantly, I've done quite a bit of work on funding models for special education and disability services. And again, the funding model itself reinforces the need to have a separate sector. So it's quite a complicated area, but I think it's very much been bedded down by the dramatic growth in provision in recent years, creating all the more tension when we come at it from an inclusive approach, going, just how inclusive are these separate settings? So I just wanted to give you an overview of the attitudinal changes that have happened in recent years and just why those changes are happening. And the reason for that is, I suppose, it's the students, it's the voting with their feet. So the diversity in our student body, and I presume the workplace as well, in the last number of decades has been notable. And as a result of that, people have had to adopt their teaching and learning kind of styles, if you like, in order to accommodate students that are considered different or other. The other thing that's happened is that we've moved beyond just talking about disability as having people with disabilities or disabled people as having barriers to learning to other forms of barriers to learning, whether it be on, Sheila mentioned, gender, ethnicity, identity, different marginalised groups within our population. And that kind of diversity piece has really grown. There's also a questioning, and Sheila mentioned this as well, of the one-size-fits-all model, and really how our education systems are structured, I suppose, to privilege, it perpetuates a certain form of privilege that suits a certain portion of the population. And that really we're expecting students to listen to the same textbooks and read the same textbooks and sit the same exams and to come out the other side all with the equal expectations of the future. And we know that really leads to, I suppose, an element of compliance and in some ways favour or charity for those that experience barriers to learning. So I just wanted to show you very quickly, this is the work of Lani Florian, who introduced the idea of the power of the bell curve and how it guides our education system, and that we assume this mythical average or norm within every classroom that we sit in, and that we have periphery students on the edge of poor performers or high performing students, and that these resources are outsourced to them. And she questions that, and she says that every classroom, and we should assume diversity in every single classroom or learning context that we have. So moving on then on to what can we do about it? And I'm just going to talk briefly now about a pedagogical shift and inclusive pedagogy that's been embedded in some learning contexts, particularly in higher education, but increasingly so it's in other educational settings as well. Alongside the attitudinal shift, there has been shifts in policy as well, and it's important to emphasise the kind of equality agenda that's taken place and the legislative changes that have taken place in recent years. Many of you may be familiar with the image on the screen. The first image of the children is of equality, where everyone receives the same supports. It's a level playing field, but you can see that some students gain in those situations and others don't. The second image is of equity, where certain supports are provided for the students that require those supports in order for them to see, in this case, a baseball game. This is a US-based image, okay? And in the third, it's considered the inclusion approach, where the systemic barriers are actually removed, and everybody can see the game coming to the student at where they're at. And a PhD student of mine often points to the need for the remaining fence that exists there in terms of the distance between the learner and the educator, which I think is something interesting to talk about. So can education systems ever be inclusive? And you may have heard of universal design for learning or multi-tiered systems of support. And this pyramid is often used in that level one approach at the very base of the pyramid, where there is the design of the education system is to meet the needs of every learner, assuming wide levels of diversity within that learning group, so that there's no need for retrofitting, there's no need for add-on supports, and that any barrier that can be removed is removed at this base layer. And then moving on to the second layer, the red layer, which is group supports for learners perhaps that have similar needs. Then level 3 might be the case of individual accommodations through the form of tech or IT. And then the fourth top of the pyramid might be more specialist personnel supports, for example. And this really all falls within the idea of universal design for learning. Like if we were to talk about what UDL actually looks like in any learning context, it's flexibility built in at the design stage. It's assuming diversity in every class. And it's basically an educational framework that's used to guide the goals we set in education, the methods, the approaches to teaching and learning, the assessments, and I'm quite interested in the extent to which UDL can inform policy in order to shape the kind of culture and attitudinal piece that exists within workplaces or education settings. It's based on 3 core principles of multiple means of representation, multiple means of action and expression, and multiple means of engagement. There's a lot to it, and if anybody wants to follow up with me afterwards, that's absolutely fine. It's very much based on neuroscientific research, and it was developed by a nonprofit organization called CAST in the United States. It really does inform quite a lot of my own teaching and learning in terms of assuming that diversity piece in the classroom, where you use students with impairments or disabilities or whatever language you want to put on it as a leverage to change and to create a more inclusive classroom environment. So I'm going to leave you with this slide where it's the start of the UDL journey, and this is possibly reflective of what I went through, is that you identify the barriers that exist in your learning setting. You embrace the variability. As I said, you use it as leverage for change. There's a huge reflection piece in this. And Sheila mentioned this kind of ongoing, every day is a school day, and it really is a journey. It really is something that you're continuing. It's that +1 approach. It can create some uncomfortable conversations, and to expect that. It's really important to amplify that learner voice and talk to the learners about what it is exactly that they are expecting from their learning experience, and to actually genuinely take that on board. And often what's missing in conversations about UDL, I think, is to actually start it and take action. But the only way to do that is to do it piecemeal, piece by piece, or you will become overwhelmed. So it's that +1 approach. Okay, that's the end of my slides. If anybody wants to contact me, there's some information there. And I know Louise is going to circulate the slides. So thanks a million.
Thanks so much, Joanne. That was a really interesting talk. And thank you, Sheila, for your contributions also. I encourage everyone to add your questions to the chat and to invite Jackie Brown of ETU to the stage. Welcome, Jackie, and thank you for chairing our panel discussion today.
Thank you, Tom, and hello to everybody. Can I just start by saying what a privilege it is to be here today, sharing ideas and having time to reflect on the theme of inclusion across all learning. I'd like to welcome back Joanne and Sheila for our panel discussion, and also to invite Joe Rafus, who is Assistant Principal at Mullingar Community College, and he himself is at the forefront of actively progressing remodelling for school planning. So our panel today, welcome everybody. We represent a broad spectrum of Irish education, and collectively supporting and being supported by the overarching National Lifelong Learning Agenda and Skills Strategy 2025. There are lots of questions, topics and ideas that we can take out of this conversation. So just taking a step back before we go into the questions, when I was preparing for this discussion, I was struck by the scale of learning and how it touches so many aspects of life across Ireland. Just a couple of, I suppose, high-level statistics for those of us who like numbers in the audience. Lifelong learning and the Lifelong Learning Agenda, as Joanne mentioned, focuses on learners and staff, but the attention has been focused to increase our national target of participation to 15% by 2025. Now, I'm not a mathematician, but by my calculations, that's over 800,000 people who are actively involved in learning outside of our traditional education model, as again, Joanne illustrated for us. And that brings in another 1.9 million learners. So overall, really, I think we are a land of saints and scholars. Our national skills agenda, again, really puts a sharp focus on inclusiveness, if anybody has time to read it. And it really pins out that, you know, education needs to be a combination and a strength of relationships between educators, training providers, and also workplace and organizations. And I mean, with that power of imagery interwoven in that trinity of employers, providers, and education, I want to really start considering how young people are experiencing inclusive education. So, Joe, if I could ask you maybe just to open up our conversation, you know, how is inclusive education being taken up actively in Irish secondary schools today?
Hey, thanks, Jackie, and hello to everybody. Well, I mean, I can speak primarily from my own context, but my own experience of other schools and having spoken to peers. Sheila mentioned something earlier around 60 nationalities, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sheila, but I think it was over 3,000 workforce. Our school is just over 300 second level students, and there's 37 nationalities currently, numerous faith backgrounds, beliefs, and you know, that's one thing. But then in terms of specific learner needs, that's almost infinite. So they're incredibly, schools in Ireland are incredibly vibrant, diverse places by their very nature. I suppose when we talk about inclusion, I suppose the thing that draws me back, and it comes from being over working with Harvard recently, Sinek's golden triangle, Simon Sinek's golden triangle of the what, how, and why we do what we do. And I suppose his message was always to start with the why rather than the what. And it's very, very easy to identify, because pretty much everybody, you would hope, can tell you what they do, and the majority of people can tell you how they do it. But I suppose the real key message is, if you want to have an inclusive environment, whether it's a workplace or whether it's second level or third level or primary school level, is you really need to focus on why you do what you do. And for that, to me, is the core thing that we do, is to create the most positive learning environment for all of our learners, regardless of their specific needs, beliefs, or backgrounds.
And Joe, in terms of, you know, it sounds like, as you said, as secondary school education, it's a very layered, vibrant place to be. And presumably you are equipping students and teachers as well with positive experiences associated with learning. You just mentioned you spent some time in Harvard learning about how to drive collaborative processes. And, you know, with that diverse representation in the school, can you tell us a little bit about what practices have worked really well to bring inclusion into the centre?
Yeah, I suppose schools traditionally there's this constant trade-off between inclusion and integration. And I'm conscious the NCSE recently kind of were pushing towards that New Brunswick model of total inclusion. And, you know, while it sounds in theory like an ideal scenario, I suppose it's more of a philosophy than an actual learning or teaching or learning method. There is always going to be a constant trade-off because of the huge diversity of needs in the school amongst its learner population. But resourcing is fundamental to it. Already schools are incredibly, and Joanne touched on it there, the financing to promote and to drive that model is, you know, we're already part of a system that is in many ways very, very underfunded, but also, you know, it's quite overloaded already. So I suppose what we done with Harvard was we were looking at as a staff in our school, as part of our DESH planning, which is all about delivering equality in education. We were looking at how to specifically to not only to target initiatives, but how to test to really see where they're working or where they being effective, and how we could tweak and adjust them at all times. And we came across a particular initiative that had run in the States around tackling chronic absenteeism amongst learners. which is obviously, that's a huge barrier for a lot of students, not only students with learning difficulties, whether it be autism or students coming from diverse backgrounds or students coming from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. If we can't get them into school, it's very, very difficult to have an impact. And that led us on then to looking at that proving ground model that is a Harvard-led program. In order to implement that in Ireland, the level of collaboration that we utilize as a staff, as a school community, and when I say staff, I'm including external agencies, I'm including parents, and pretty much anybody who crosses in any way the threshold of the school needs to work together to provide the supports that can enable inclusion to happen in the most workable way possible.
And you've struck a few thoughts there. There was a piece of research done in 2019 by SkillsNet and Professor Dave Collins around enabling the workforce of the future, and the idea of the trade-off of the short-term versus the long-term needs was something of a barrier. And Joanne, if I can just kind of ask you as well, like what Ray's talked about there in terms of inclusion and total inclusion, and you mentioned the social model of learning earlier on. What can we do practically? So what can educators do to bring inclusive learning into their practice and balance those trade-offs and that tension that we carry between, are we doing the right thing or are we, how do we not overthink it, and how do we get into some action?
Yeah, it's really complicated for starters. It's really important to say that there's no simple solution, and there has to be grey. There has to be nuance to this. Do you know what I mean? And I think the debate in recent years has been quite polarized, and I think it's really unhelpful. And actually, I think there's more consensus than people, I suspect there's more consensus than people think. So I mentioned earlier that the students are kind of driving the change by virtue of the fact that they're a more diverse or more evidently diverse group in learner settings and in classrooms. But equally, the teachers are voting for their feet in terms of their preferences for professional learning around inclusive pedagogies like universal design for learning. In the last number of years, the demand for these kind of, programs and courses and micro-credentials and badges is off the charts. And that's a sign that teachers themselves are seeing diversity in their classrooms, and they know they need to respond. They know they want to respond to it in order to have meaningful engagement and genuine learning in the classroom. So I think there's a real innovation amongst the teacher body. Now, that's kind of the bottom-up approach. Equally, we need it at the policy point as well, and you need that leadership. And that's the other point I just wanted to make, is that the research that I've done over the past 15 years or so all points to the one thing: no pressure, Joe, but it's the school leader, the centre leader, the education setting leader is key to whether an inclusive vision or ethos exists in that school. And that trickles down to the caretaker, to the educator, to the support, the assistant in the classroom. Everything is influenced by that inclusive vision and that strive that every decision that's made within that centre or education setting is the backdrop to it is inclusion. And that's not just tokenistic, that's actually meaningful. Okay, well, how can we ensure that every student has access to this school tour? How can we ensure that everyone who is attending this in training day has access to all the materials ahead of time, has access to maybe a recording of it after the event, has full, can have choice and flexibility in how they access the content, how they engage with the work, how they engage with their peers. And it's just thinking that there's a kind of a set of guidelines, I suppose, and that's what the UDL framework essentially is a set of guidelines for you as an educator. And it's not another layer of things that you have to do. It's a framework I find really helpful, where you're doing half of it already. You'll find that you fulfill half of that UDL framework anyway. But it's that it shines a light on maybe areas that you can improve on.
And I find the universal design principles, as you said, they are in practice a lot of the time. And when you spend some time looking at them, you realize that there are things there that you're doing, and it gives you a sense of comfort that there are a lot of right things being done, and then there are areas to improve. So again, speaking of pressure and no pressure, Sheila, so you work for PwC, and just back to that point, Joanne, that you made around leadership, and keeping ahead of the pace of change, and leadership is so important. And Sheila, we're talking about social constructs here, and workplaces are places where you could argue for or against that they can improve our society and what's happening, or again, they can disimprove based on the decisions that are made in there. So Sheila, and again, PwC as a financial services, but a professional services firm, has been identified as a category in the lifelong learning agenda where lifelong learning is actually happening and is happening maybe at a higher rate than perhaps some other industries. So could you share with us maybe some of the practices that are happening in leadership development in PwC to help bring inclusion about? Could you tell us a few stories from there? I'm sure people would love to know how it's been done there.
Sure. And I suppose, as I mentioned in my presentation, there's a lot happening in terms of from leadership support around inclusion and, the policies. And I think all of that contributes in to creating the environment when people are leading in that space. But from my perspective, looking at it, from the development angle in terms of how the work we try to do to develop inclusive leaders, I think emotional intelligence, having empathy and compassion as a leader, is critical for successful inclusive leadership. And all our senior programs provide the opportunity for our leaders to do emotional intelligence questionnaire and to get one-to-one coaching with an accredited coach to explore their emotional intelligence and the impact that has on them as leaders. All our leadership programs, that include looking at, leading a high-performing team. And in that, we specifically talk about what we call mining for conflict. And that essentially is about proactively seeking different viewpoints and perspectives, and being curious to understand them, not to judge them, but to understand them and to see, to be open to what that might mean, or maybe changing approach or doing something different. And if you think, and I mentioned a lot of our inclusion first policies and some newer ones on things like, leave for pregnancy loss or domestic abuse. Now, the team member who might be experiencing that is going to come and chat to their manager about availing of that. So part of our role in developing inclusive leaders, I think, is how do we help people have the more supportive conversations that they need to have, and how we're doing that in our development. And, I mentioned that we've really minimized our mandatory programs, but a key program that we do think is mandatory is managing your people. And in that, we really do cover topics like inclusive leadership, unconscious bias, and being an inclusive leader. And anybody who interviews within the firm has got to do unconscious bias training. And one thing that's going to be rolled out in the next year is we're getting ready to launch out an online inclusive leader mindset pathway, which will have a number of online modules. So again, promoting the importance of this. And I think as well, just sorry, John or Jackie, just to pick on one point that Joe was, we were talking about the education. Actually, some of the things that the corporate world can do, I think, some examples of what PwC do and maybe other corporates can think of doing is, like, we're part of the Junior Achievement Program, which is where business goes into the schools to help, them see somebody from the business environment, or working with DCU on their Access program, where you have some students who, by virtue of their background, may not have the network or the opportunity to get summer work in places like PwC and business like that, and how we commit to giving that experience to people during those summer months. Or a more recent initiative where some of our tech team, because that's a whole new service area, is going into schools with Tech We Can and getting people, particularly females, to think of that they can, advance or have a career within the tech community. So I suppose there are some of the things we do in trying to build inclusive leadership.
So Sheila, just as you were talking there, what struck me was the idea that obviously there's a vast range of concepts there that you're introducing people and leaders and helping them to continue their awareness and to develop those kind of self-management skills of making decisions based on, and back to your point, Joanne, based on facts and science and some research as well, but that you're bringing in that richness. Just in terms of the pathways, you mentioned the word pathways. Is everybody's pathway the same? Is it different? Like if I went in, would I have a different pathway to someone else the same grade as me? What way does it work?
So it very much depends on the area of the business that you come into. You will have people who will come in through, to qualify as a qualified accountant, and they will go through different stages and different types of work experience as they work through that journey. And similarly, some people who are, following the tax exam route. But now we have a much broader range of services. So you people are coming in not to be the traditional accountant or tax advisor, but who are working on cyber, who are working on strategy, who are working on doing deals or business recovery. So the pathway may be similar for you in your area of specialism, but it will be different, so it's not the pathway for everybody who joins the firm, doesn't do exactly the same thing. But where from a leadership perspective, we try to provide, I think we talked about sharing perspectives. There's no point doing a leadership program with just people from, say, a strategy team, unless there's something you're working on within that strategy group where, you do some more team-based learning with them or something specific. We like to have that diversity of all the different opinions and the different views and the different types of experience and skill sets on our leadership programs, so people can benefit from that. But when you get to practice out or see how you apply it in reality by bringing your own example, then you're keeping it relevant for your particular area.
Very social. And again, maybe this is paradoxical, but what I've heard today is that inclusivity, helping to educate people around and put in the by design, if you like, we're promoting that with having personalized pathways, but we're bringing people together with improved ways of conversations, communication, collaboration. So all of those pieces are combined. And what I've heard today as well is the integration between education, workplace, and that in practice this is happening, and again it's quite a positive thing. And I found a really interesting quote about Ireland as I was doing my homework and my lifelong learning before this event, and we've been described as being the heart of cultural, economic and technological leading edge of Europe by the Economic Times last year. And with Ireland now being the only majority English-speaking country in the EU post-Brexit, our inclusive education practices are at the heart of our success, but they're also at the heart of scrutiny for other international agencies. They're looking to us to see, how this is all putting together. And if I could just, we're coming to an end now and thinking about like our final sort of parting nuggets of wisdom for people. If I can invite the panel, is there something, if you had to give people one or two things that they could take from this today that they can put into action, or you think is really important, what have we learned and how do we keep that advantage that we have at the moment, and keep going the way we've been going? What do we do as educators and as people who care for what's going to happen in the future? And perhaps maybe Joe, I'll start with yourself, as we started off at the beginning with yourself. Any words of wisdom?
I suppose, look, the most important message across all of this is that the true inclusion, and we're embracing diversity, but inclusion has given us the opportunity to create the most positive environment that we possibly can for learners. And essentially what we need to do is to create an environment, a place, a culture where every member of that community can thrive. Lovely.
Thank you. Sheila, anything from yourself?
I think Joe pretty much captured what can apply in the corporate world as well. What I would say is the importance of connection. Adding on to that, the empathy and the compassion and the importance of connection. And we probably saw during the more recent years of COVID, the importance of connection in helping keeping people included. And maybe just how we all gather data to understand the diversity we have in our organizations or our schools, because that, I think, will then influence the actual strategy and the actions we need to take to continually ensure inclusivity.
Thank you, Sheila. And Joanne, from yourself?
Yeah, I think we're at a crossroads in Ireland at the moment. I think we're at the crux of something, a big change. I think these discussions happening are so important in that. And I think it's a real opportunity to have equitable education systems by design at the start, from the outset, in order to shape future generations so they can progress through to PwC workplaces and others in the future, and that we're not losing portions of the population that could offer our workplaces something really quite significant. So I think it's a really crucial time and a time to pause and reflect on what we've done and where we need to go.
That is a lovely ending to our conversation. So I would like to thank everybody today. I've learned a lot. My reflections I'm taking out, future generations, our generation Alpha, how are we supporting them? What legacy are we creating for them in our workplaces, in our thinking? Because our thinking and our actions today, they will form the policies that will help people to the future as well. So getting involved, as you said, Joanne, in the conversations is really important as well. And for people to start thinking about this in a broader sense, but into the practical actions. So I think I will hand back over to Tom now. Tom, you're back.
Thanks, Jackie, and thanks to all of our panelists. This was really fascinating conversation. And to all of the people who joined us on the webinar, we'll be sending out a post-event email with a link to the recording and a short survey on the topic today. So please note, we do have lots of resources available for our audiences. So check out the YouTube channel. You'll see the back catalog of Lincoln Learn webinars, as well as this one recording should be up there as soon as we have it ready. And we'll have other talks recorded there from our Learnovation conference, including Dr. Joanne Banks there. And we also have a monthly podcast called Inside Learning, and that has a new episode every month, and we focus on the science of learning and future of work. So thanks everyone for joining us today, and we look forward to welcoming you to the next series of Lincoln Learn events in 2023. So bye for now.